Some people seem to laugh through almost everything. They're the ones who can find humor even in situations that would leave most people frustrated, overwhelmed, or emotionally drained. At first glance, it might seem like they simply don't take life too seriously, but in many cases, the opposite is true. People who are able to smile in the middle of chaos often learn that skill in places where life was anything but easy. Humor wasn't just part of their personality, it became a way to cope, a quiet survival strategy. And I'm not talking about the everyday inconveniences we all complain about from time to time. I'm talking about experiences that permanently change the way someone views the world. The kind of experiences that teach you, often much earlier than you should have to learn, that certainty is fragile, safety isn't guaranteed, and people aren't always who they appear to be. After enough of those moments, something begins to shift. The brain adapts, not because it's broken, but because it's trying to protect itself. A mind that has repeatedly faced uncertainty becomes exceptionally good at recognizing patterns. It learns to notice details other people miss, to anticipate emotional changes, and to detect possible danger long before it becomes obvious. From the outside, this can sometimes look like overthinking, but from the inside, it feels like preparation. Imagine someone cuts them off in traffic. Many people immediately react with anger or irritation. But someone who has lived through enough difficult experiences may respond very differently. Instead of assuming the worst, their mind starts considering possibilities. Maybe that person is rushing to the hospital. Maybe they're dealing with terrible news. Maybe they're simply carrying a burden no one else can see. This doesn't excuse careless behavior. It simply reflects a different perspective. When you've experienced genuine chaos, everyday frustrations rarely feel as significant. But perhaps one of the most overlooked consequences of hardship is empathy. People who have spent years learning to read emotional environments for their own safety often become incredibly sensitive to the emotions of others. They notice the subtle things, a voice that sounds just slightly different, a smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, a laugh that arrives a moment too late. While many people overlook these small signals, someone shaped by difficult experiences often notices them immediately. They don't only hear what people say, they pay attention to how it's said. They notice the pauses, the hesitation, the silence between words, and silence itself becomes meaningful. It isn't empty. Sometimes it carries exhaustion, sometimes sadness, sometimes tension, sometimes the feeling that someone is holding back something they don't know how to express. People who have endured hardship often develop an instinct for sensing the emotional atmosphere around them. They walk into a room and immediately feel whether people are comfortable, distant, anxious, or at ease. While others notice the decorations or the music, they're often picking up on something invisible. It's almost like having an emotional radar that's always quietly running in the background. Interestingly, psychologists have observed that difficult experiences don't always leave people weaker. In many cases, they create something known as post-traumatic growth. Research suggests that after surviving major adversity, some individuals don't simply return to who they were before, they grow into someone different. Life begins to feel more valuable. Relationships become more meaningful. Ordinary moments suddenly carry extraordinary weight. A peaceful evening, a quiet conversation, a walk outside, a sunset that somehow feels impossible to ignore. It's not because they become overly emotional, it's because they've learned how easily those moments can disappear. Once you've seen how fragile life can be, the ordinary no longer feels ordinary. At the same time, growth doesn't erase the past. Even when someone becomes wiser, stronger, or more compassionate, their nervous system often remembers the environments that shaped it. Many people develop what psychologists call hypervigilance. Their internal alarm system stays active, not because they live in constant fear, but because their brain has learned that paying attention once helped keep them safe. You might notice it in small habits. They choose the seat facing the entrance. They always have a backup plan. They mentally prepare for situations that most people never even consider. To someone else, this might look like anxiety, but often it's simply experience speaking. Another common pattern is that people who've been through a lot tend to minimize their own pain. They'll often say things like, "It wasn't that bad," or "Other people have had it much worse." Over time, dismissing their own struggles becomes automatic. Part of that comes from survival. If you convince yourself you're fine, it's easier to keep moving. But there's something deeper happening too. Many people who have experienced hardship become uncomfortable with seeing themselves as victims. Strength becomes part of their identity. Asking for help can feel surprisingly difficult, even when they truly need it. This often creates an interesting dynamic in relationships. They're incredibly dependable. They're the person who would answer your call in the middle of the night without hesitation. They're always willing to carry someone else's burden. Yet when it's their turn to lean on someone, they often hesitate. Not because they don't want support, but because somewhere in the past they learned that depending on others sometimes came with disappointment, rejection, or pain. If trust once felt uncertain, closeness doesn't always feel relaxing. Sometimes it feels risky. As a result, they learn to become deeply independent. From the outside, that independence looks like confidence. Inside, it can sometimes feel like loneliness. Still, difficult experiences often leave behind another remarkable ability: adaptability. People who have survived challenging chapters usually become exceptionally good at adjusting to change. Unexpected situations that overwhelm others may feel surprisingly manageable to them, not because they enjoy uncertainty, but because at one point in their lives, adapting wasn't optional. It was necessary. And then there's humor, especially the kind of humor that some people call dark. To outsiders, it can seem inappropriate or insensitive. But for those who rely on it, humor serves a very different purpose. It creates distance from pain. It makes unbearable experiences feel just a little more manageable. Every joke becomes a quiet reminder that hardship didn't take away their ability to smile. It's a subtle act of resilience. Another fascinating pattern appears in the way they relate to control. They often become very particular about small details. Maybe they arrange things a certain way. Maybe they stick to routines. Maybe they always use the same cup for their morning coffee. Yet when major life changes happen, a career shift, unexpected news, or uncertainty about the future, they often remain surprisingly composed. Why? Because experience has taught them an important lesson. The biggest events in life are rarely fully within our control. The smaller ones sometimes are. So they focus their energy where it can actually make a difference, and they gradually learn to let the rest unfold. This creates an interesting contradiction. They can be cautious while remaining kind, protective without becoming cold, realistic without losing hope. People who've endured hardship often become comfortable holding two seemingly opposite truths at the same time. Life can be painful and beautiful, unpredictable and meaningful, sometimes all at once. Yet beneath these strengths, there's often a quieter emotion that receives far less attention: grief. Not only the grief of losing people, but the grief of losing earlier versions of themselves. The version that trusted without hesitation. The version that entered a room without instinctively scanning it. The version that didn't rehearse conversations before having them. Sometimes they miss the person they used to be. The lighter version, the more carefree version. But that version isn't completely gone. It evolves. It becomes someone more thoughtful, more observant, more intentional. Someone who treasures peace because they've experienced chaos. Someone who deeply values emotionally safe people because they understand what the absence of safety feels like. Perhaps that's what truly happens to people who've been through more than most. They don't simply survive. They gain a deeper understanding of human nature. They discover that real strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about rebuilding yourself again and again, even when you no longer fit together the way you once did. Over time, pain slowly transforms into wisdom. Experience becomes compassion. And without even realizing it, many of these people become a source of stability for others, like a lighthouse standing in the middle of a storm. Not because their journey was easy, but because they learned how to navigate rough waters. And now their light quietly helps others find their own way forward. So the next time you meet someone who stays calm when everything around them feels chaotic, someone who laughs in difficult moments, or someone who notices emotional shifts that everyone else seems to miss, remember that this kind of awareness usually comes with a story. They've likely carried burdens you'll never fully see, yet they're still here, still moving forward, still choosing kindness, still choosing hope. And that's not weakness, that's resilience. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.